Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Hope you're all well. If you can just let me know if my audio is good, we'll get started. Five by five. Wonderful. Okay, we've got a fun conversation for you guys today. Have Steve Young in the background, and I'm just going to read a bit of a bio here for him first, and then I'll bring him in. So, Steve Young has always been super curious about everything. With a brain like a sponge, the thirst for knowledge fuels his creative engines. At school, his main interests were maths and physics, and he always was fascinated by numbers, equations, and fundamental science. At home, his interests were computers, turntables, and electronic music. He was born the same year as the home computer, a Generation XY crossover kid, an early digital native with bleeps, bloops, and glitches, the soundtrack of his life. Based in Scotland, he's the father of three, an author, natural philosopher, alchemist, a musician, and known by the music alias Headflux. He's also known for his new book, A Fool's Wisdom, Science Conspiracies, and the Secret Art of Alchemy, that was released on April 1st, our true new year. This wonderful book challenges our contemporary scientific dogmas in light of the alchemical perspective. The book was #1 bestseller in Western philosophy on Amazon US. Steve took education as far as he could, completing a Master's of Science degree from the University of St. Andrews and a PhD from the University of Surrey, all while DJing, producing music, and geeking out on computers at every available opportunity. After graduating, the prospect of a lifetime spent in the dusty halls of academia, working on obscure scientific problems that few can comprehend, was tempting. Nevertheless, he went for the money and got into IT consultancy. Corporate office life drove him mad, but turned out to be the catalyst to realizing his true purpose, forcing the life lessons he needed in order to claim his independence, go self-employed, and start making music every day. He is a modern Renaissance man, in my opinion. And one of his passions is what he calls audio alchemy, a practical method of musical production based in Hermetic teachings and a complete set of correspondences between music and alchemy. He taught this subject to students in a series of retreats in Hawaii and some smaller workshops throughout the US and Europe. The years 2015 to 18 were spent soul-seeking in Central America and Hawaii, participating in shamanic ceremonies, learning alchemy, and the traditional ways of healing with plant medicines and music. He's done 7 tours of Australia, lived in Honduras, toured Central America, lived in Hawaii, and gigged throughout the US and Canada. He's performed throughout Europe and the UK many times, and also got out to Israel, South Africa, and Russia on a few occasions. So with that, I'd like to welcome Headflux, Steve Young, to the stage.
Wow. Thank you, Mike. That was an amazing introduction. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So Hawaii, where did you live in Hawaii?
On the Big Island, near Hilo and Pahoa, sort of about halfway between those two places. Yeah, I ended up there. There was a guy I met online. His name was Andy Freest, or Andy Freeland now. We met online in like 2013, and he was in Hawaii, and we talked about stuff for a few years. And we liked the idea of doing an event together in Hawaii, and so it was something we always talked about. And then when I eventually got an O1 visa to go and live and work in the USA for 3 years, it seemed like that was the place that was calling me the most. So I ended up in Hawaii, and I stayed there for 2.5 years. And I worked with Andy, and we did a number of retreats, 4 retreats we did, and some smaller events and workshops and things. So that was really, the start of like audio alchemy and like putting it out there. And my first attempt to combine alchemical knowledge with with music, essentially. At that point, that was the first my first impression of alchemy was that it was all about music, but of course since then I've realized it's much more broad, and applies to really any creative or scientific process.
It caught my eye because I lived in Hawaii briefly myself in the 80s, but I never made it to the Big Island. I lived on Maui and have some adventures to tell from that time that are featured in a couple of chapters of an upcoming book that I have that's been a long time waiting. But so yeah, but I wanted to have you on. I first came across you in the Friday group and was completely unfamiliar with your work. For people who don't know, the Friday group is a group of a lot of academics who've kind of, their minds have been open to the ideas that maybe everything isn't as we were taught, and a lot of the cornerstones of our ologies are based on flimsy ground. And so that was where I came across you first, and then I saw you on an episode of AlphaCast, and with your bio and all the DJ stuff, and thinking of DJ Mike Winter, I was so tempted to say, and boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. Channeling my inner Mike Winter, But,
Mike Winter's great. Yeah, I met him actually just in 2018. It was my last year in the States before I moved back to Scotland, but I met him just then, and we really hit it off talking about alchemy and Walter Russell. He was obviously telling me about Walter Russell. I didn't know much about him at that time. We really hit it off, and he wanted to get me out to Music and Sky, but then of course the world was brought to a standstill shortly after, and but I did manage to get out there in 2023 last year out to California.
So you've been one time?
I've been one time. Yeah. It was a heck of a trip. We had earthquakes.
It's way out there. It's not just flying into San Francisco.
Yeah, we had an earthquake, a hurricane, wildfires, and the sheriff came and shut my set down while I was halfway through playing. Yeah, so it was,
oh my gosh,
it was
I hadn't heard anything about that.
Yeah,
well, that's kind of reminds me of Acapulco, because they had the massive hurricane that wiped out half of everything there. And for Anarchapulco, the conference that happened in February, where I attended, and then while we were there were 2 earthquakes. So it's It's interesting where the truthers go, stuff seems to happen.
Yeah, it really felt like we were the center of something. There was just so much going on. All the elemental ordeals, as I like to call them. Yeah, you got the fire, the earth, the air, and the water. We're all going a bit wild that day, or that weekend, actually.
Most in my audience probably already know, but I'll be going to Music and Sky. Actually, I leave a week from, what is today, Tuesday? A week from tomorrow, I'll be leaving, and super excited about that, and getting to see some of the friends that I made in Mexico again, and experience that. So it's a shame you won't be there this year. That would have just been the icing on the cake. But
hopefully I'll get out next year.
So, let's talk a little bit about your book, and I'm sure we'll kind of just weave in different directions as we're discussing things. But, I posted, I was going to read the review that I posted on Amazon. I couldn't find it anywhere. It's gone missing. So
oh, really?
I need to, I'll look closer, but it's an awesome book that I wish I had come across 30 years ago, because it would have saved me a whole lot of time, and it would have put me on to subjects that would have, I think, taken me a lot further. But we all have our journey. We all have to go through what we go through when it comes to learning things. Sometimes we have to learn a whole lot of bunk in order to realize what the truth is, and then knowing that stuff allows you to be able to kind of find a balance between the two. But it's a book that I think people who are already in the process of awakening and are interested in the different deceptions that we've been subjected to, they'll get a lot out of it. I think I learned something on just about every page. It was really awesome, but it's also written in a way that's really accessible to people who haven't gone down all of these different rabbit holes. It's a great crossover book. It's a good book to give people who are like, they're firm science believers, but they really don't know a whole lot about what they believe. They're just believing the mainstream narratives.
Yeah.
But really, it goes about dispelling a lot of the mainstream scientific myths, one cornerstone at a time. And I think that's awesome what you've done. It's really beautifully written. It's concise. It's not overwordy. And it's just packed with so much information. The theme, obviously the book itself is called A Fool's Wisdom, and you put it in the context of really the fool's journey, which is a subject that's dear to me. I'll mention some of my own dips into that subject, but it's this idea of one who plays. So maybe you can expand on that idea a little bit and why you chose to take that angle with your book.
Sure. Yeah, I that was, really, I felt like I got a lot of power from understanding the fool, the archetype of the fool. And this was fairly recently. I mean, I'd obviously, I'd had tarot cards for years. I'd heard of the fool and everything, but what when I realized it is the sort of first step on the path to wisdom, and this is kind of what I am. I talk about how I always took myself quite seriously because I had a scientific background, and coming into electronic music, I mean, electronic music is a scientific, it's probably one of the most scientific types of music because you're working with numbers and waveforms and technology and acoustics, and you're constantly dealing with scientific ideas, and and a lot of physics education is just working with wave equations, like whether it's classical mechanics or quantum mechanics or anything. A lot of the actual work you're doing in class and stuff is just working with sine waves and cosine waves and multiplying them together and integrating them and yada yada, doing all that. And that is essentially what synthesizers do and what is done in electronic music. They are the it's like the fruits that I feel like synthesizers and electronic music are like the fruits of a lot of that knowledge. And so I was really turned on to it, and I loved it. Of course, loved the music, I loved the tech, and I love working on it. So I went down that road, but I took it very seriously, approached it scientifically, and increasingly, began to understand it in a more shamanic way, as I understood that music was, in shamanic practice, they're essentially giving people a plant medicine and playing music for them throughout the night. That is, basically what's happening in a shamanic ceremony. But then I realized, of course, on a dance floor, there's a similar thing happening, except you're not giving people medicine. They're, taking whatever they want. It's their choice, but you're providing music in a sort of in a setting like that, and people are taking either natural medicines or synthetic. But there's a transformation that happens, and so yeah, I was pulled into the shamanic thing as well, but again, a lot of my science connections think that stuff's extremely foolish. I this is where the fool thing. I realized, like, all throughout my life, I've been called a fool for doing what I was doing. Although you get a PhD, people think you're very smart and serious, but if you have a PhD and you start talking about spirituality and shamanism and psychedelic drugs and God, religion, and all that, then very quickly everyone's just like, you're a fool. You don't belong in our club anymore, kind of things. So after all the science, I kind of went headfirst into the spiritual stuff through shamanism and researching like Eastern philosophies and all this. And a lot of it is, in retrospect, as a grown man, a wise man now, I look back, I'm like, God, that was really foolish. Moving to Honduras, with my wife and 2 daughters. I mean, when I think about that now, I'm just like, wow, that was a really foolish move. I mean, Honduras is an extremely dangerous country, one of the highest murder rates in the world and stuff. But I had made a connection there, a shaman, and I really felt this strong connection with him. And he had a lot to teach me, and I had a lot to teach him. And it was just that I just wanted to live there for a few months and work with him and do the ceremonies. And so I did it. And of course, yeah, it seemed like a very foolish thing to do, but it worked out well, and I learned a lot. And that was like my stepping stone to Hawaii.
And was this a form of shamanism that was rooted in the consumption of entheogenic substances, to use a
Yes.
word I don't really care for very much, but
Sure. Yeah. I mean, ayahuasca primarily, but then there's a whole sort of suite of other like Amazonian shamanic medicines that they work with as well. So, I did do a lot of different things while I was out there. And it's always ceremonial. People in the West usually will, if they're taking a substance, they'll do it in a social setting, or let's say, or a celebratory setting. But in the shamanic way, it's more ceremonial. It's tight. It's strict. It's like you got to sit down and close your eyes and be quiet and let the shaman like guide the experience and so on. And it. I was really picking up. There's a lot of stuff to do with earth, air, fire, and water. At that time, I wasn't really understanding it. I was still in the materialist sort of mindset, but the shamanic experiences really broke down that materialistic mindset that I'm just a body on a planet floating through space or whatever, and realized there's this whole inner world that we don't usually see, this world of soul and spirit, and subtle dimensions. Kind of opened me up to all that. So, but again,
but isn't that just a trick of brain chemistry?
well, they say, yeah.
I'm being sarcastic.
I know,
I
but
have I've had a lot of those kinds of experiences myself in my early, my 20s. I experimented a lot with psychedelics of different sorts, and then had kind of a renaissance about 10 years ago where I did ayahuasca almost a dozen times, and so we could definitely have some very long conversations on that subject, because I'm sure we both have a lot of interesting things to say about it, especially with our current framework of understanding. And you touch on it in the book in ways that I really resonated with. Just going back to the whole tarot thing, because other people who I grew up with the tarot and astrology and the I Ching and all of these kinds of different tools that many came out of the East for divining and for just like a little snapshot of what's going on in the moment, trying to understand the individual in relationship to the world. Sorry, we're both kind of experiencing processing of health, so we'll try our best not to cough on you. But this is why we had to delay this for about a week, because we were both not so great. But going back to the tarot, this idea, people don't really know this maybe unless they've dipped into it, but the tarot is known as the Fool's Journey. The zero card of the tarot, I used to think it was the first card, but it's the zero card, is the Fool. And it's this character that's like stepping off a cliff and is kind of looking off into the sunrise or the sunset, and and is about to take a grand adventure without realizing it, because he's a fool, right? And then you describe it as one who plays, which I think you can expand on that in a second. But it's interesting because this card is so profound in so many ways. It's the trump card. It's either the most powerful card in the deck when it's used for playing games, or it's entirely excluded. It's the jester. It's the fool. It's the clown. And then we got this guy that seems to be kind of important to a lot of people named Trump, who owned a casino. He made money in casinos, and it's just like there's so much to this that ties into really deep levels of understanding. And maybe you can just riff on that for a little while.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a massive archetype, and being the zero card as well, because zero is like the circle. It's like sort of all and everything. I think it's very like humbling as well. Like when I realized, a fool is essentially one who plays, or an entertainer is a fool, and that professionally that's what I was. Even though in my solitude I'm doing science and I'm doing all this research and like mixing all these like waves together and doing all this scientific stuff, but actually in my professional capacity I'm hired entertainment. People expect me to go and make them have a good time, right? That's what I get paid to do. And so realizing that, but also because of the subject matter I was tackling with alchemy and science, and they're like big topics that I knew it's going to trigger a lot of people, and that kind of thing. But so I wanted to like humble myself in the book, and there was no better way to humble myself than by simply admitting that I am a fool. I'm a professional fool. I've done lots of foolish things that people told me at the time were foolish, and and when you like after the last sort of 4 years, everything that happened with the pandemic and everything, right? It's like if you didn't believe in COVID, you're a fool, right? It's like it's the sort of like the fools are always these like kind of like outliers who don't do things the same way as everybody else, kind of almost like live life opposite to everyone else. And that was very clear during the pandemic when I wasn't wearing a mask and I would go backwards around the supermarket, like the opposite way that the arrows were pointing and stuff. Like, just
Are
did
you a
everything.
science denier?
I just had to do everything the opposite, right, of what everyone else was doing. Like I had to, it was like I just had to. It was like a test of metal, but like it's like that with the with the DJ as well, because the DJ sort of goes to work when everyone else is going to party and relax, right? So you're going to work when they're all partying and relaxing. Of course, you're on one side of the stage, everyone else is on the other, and then they all go back home and go to bed. So they'll go back to work, and then you go to sleep. You're kind of basically sleeping while the crowd, sleeping on Monday morning while everyone else is going back to work. So yeah, as a DJ and entertainer, you are sort of in this like inverted, place where you're kind of weaving through like the other side of culture or whatever. You're on the other side of culture from other people. And so yeah, just really embraced that. And so yeah, it helped me to sort of just humble myself and say, look, I am a fool. I've made mistakes. So I think with a lot of the science stuff, when you talk about it online, if you say, for example, okay, the earth is flat or something like that, right? Then people think you're a flat earther, you're like an enemy of them or whatever. But it's like, no, I'm a globe earther till I was 38 years old. It's like I'm all the things that you think I'm not. It's just that I've been on a journey where things have changed. So I believed in the globe till I was 38 years old. I don't think I ever believed in viruses, honestly, but maybe that's just because I never got diagnosed. I've never been diagnosed with a virus, right? So I've never had to deal with that. What happens when, a man in a white coat tells you have a virus? I've never had to deal with that. But, people who go to the doctors a lot, they have to deal with it all the time because every single blooming condition now is blamed on viruses. So yeah, so sorry, go on, Mike, please.
No, go ahead. I interrupted.
No, it's all right. You go.
I was just wondering. Well, first off, what was your PhD thesis on? Just out of curiosity.
You want the title? It's Probing Nuclear Halos with Pion Photo Production.
Sounds like a pretty basic subject, really.
Hang on, I could grab it actually. Here it is. So that was another thing I realized was, even though nothing in here was particularly useful to my life, I did write a book, I did actually write a book. This was my first book, my PhD thesis. And so I thought, well, even if the science isn't useful, I have learned how to write a science book. But I've had all these years since to, I've been meeting people all over the world, and, so there's a sort of humor, I wanted to deliver it in a humorous way, in a general interest way, but also that was like hard hitting rebuking of the science. I thought if I do it all serious and if I go like really in depth on quantum physics and all that, I thought I'm just going to lose people because, I don't think quantum physicists are going to read this book,
Oh, you're referring to the new book or the older
this book? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely got a nice sense of humor throughout it. And yeah, I don't think that would be appreciated in the PhD thesis, probably.
No. Yeah. So this book, this is very, very dry. And I mean, so many just like massive equations and stuff. I mean, I couldn't even imagine people like really reading and enjoying any of that stuff. But
Yeah.
you know,
When I was in my 20s, I was deeply interested in this marriage of the new physics with Eastern mysticism, because I grew up with followers of gurus and meditated, and so that whole thought process from the East was really appealing to me. And I read all kinds of books that were like the latest in science, that had to do with quantum physics, and how basically the highest levels of science were looping back around and starting to confirm what the ancient mystics were teaching thousands of years ago, but they were using a different language to describe what they were experiencing.
yeah,
I read the Dancing Woolly Masters and the Tao of Physics, and books by Amit Goswami, The Self-Aware Universe, and these sorts of things, and was really interested in all of that, and the holographic universe, this idea of the
great
fractal
book.
nature of reality. And I had no clue really until about 7 years ago, when I started to look deeper into cosmology, that that a great deal of that was just quantum woo, and that it really didn't have a concrete basis in science. So when did you first begin to suspect that academia as a whole had been co-opted, if that's a fair generalization of your thought process nowadays?
I mean, I certainly had some suspicions, while I was there, that, everything I was teaching was not proven or, certain. But there's like no time to disprove it when you're in academia, right? It's like, because you're always just on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And so, having time away, as I say, going to Honduras and living essentially in the mountains for 6 months with no TV, that helped really to deprogram a lot of the British, the British matrix. If you grow up in the UK, Scotland, or England, there's a huge amount of like programming that you're subjected to, and so it helped to like deprogram a lot of that stuff. And at that time, I did still believe in a lot of the science, and I remember talking with the shaman one day, and we were talking about like the visions and stuff that you see in the ayahuasca and stuff, and I was trying to talk about it in quantum mechanical terms. I was trying to make sense of it, and I was talking about quantum physics and how it all relates, and the shaman, he just looked at me, he just put his hand on my shoulder, he's like, "Steve, it's all bullshit, man." And I was really offended. Like, I was really offended. I'm
So
like, this is my
so
life, this is my PhD
So
and
basically, you
everything.
took a lot of drugs and then decided all that hard science was bogus. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, this shaman had said it because obviously he was, listening to me from a sort of naturalist point of view, listening to me talk about all these like, academic concepts and everything that don't really relate to reality. And he's just like, it's all bullshit, man. And so that stuck with me. And I started looking into it more. But I must admit, I came to the globe Earth or the flat Earth stuff before I actually started really getting into the quantum and the atomic stuff. And yeah, so but it
How did
seemed
that
like
begin?
it was all related to me. Sorry.
How did that begin?
That was like in I think late 2015 or early 2016. I started watching stuff online, just like the Eric Dubay stuff. And whatever else was going on at that time. It seemed like there was a lot more channels back then than there is now. I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of channels that just don't exist anymore, like people who used to do videos on this topic that are just gone. But so
Well, it's been algorithm to death, obviously,
yeah,
but it's not died
yeah, it's
by
definitely
any
not
means.
died. Yeah. um, so that was that was majorly mind blowing, of course. And that was like 2016, and
But what were some of the things that, like, the aha of, like, oh my gosh, this might not be what we were taught? What were some of the penny
yeah,
drops
well,
for you?
I mean, with all that stuff, I mean, there's a lot to take in at first. There's lots to rebuke in modern science, and like I think the first thing I watched was that 200 proofs that Earth is not a spinning globe. I went into it pretty hard-headed and a bit skeptical. But then the more you start thinking about it, and as we say in the book, and I mean others have said it before, I'm not the first to say it, but the only test that matter is the horizon line. Prove that the horizon line curves, and prove that you're actually spinning. And so I kind of obsessed over those two problems for, I don't know, it seemed like it wasn't that long. It was like many months though. But the thing is, even after I became convinced that I wasn't spinning, I still just kept on looking for a few years, like just on the internet. I'm just constantly looking to see if I missed anything, if there's some proof or some new thing from NASA or whatever that's gonna prove me wrong. I just kept on looking, but I didn't really talk about it in public. I talked about it in person with people, which was didn't go well. And so I decided not to talk about it in public, which it just seemed like it was not a subject that people would resonate with at all. And I met one person, one guy who was also what you might call a geocentrist, and for a few years that was it. We only knew one other person who actually was into it or agreed with any of it. But then I started meeting more academics, and as you say, so there's lots of academics and doctors and stuff who know about this stuff, but they don't want to talk about it in public because they'll just, well, I guess they imagine they're going to get so much hassle that it's just not worth it.
Well, people, I mean, with the beliefs that you and I have nowadays, people would consider us loonies or, just gullible.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because between the two of us, we have about 20 years of higher education, 4 degrees between the two of us. And, we've learned how to think methodically. And obviously your thesis there is that, just that one page you showed us with all the equations. I never went anywhere nearly as deep into mathematics as you did, but I loved math. One of my favorite subjects in school was geometry. And so when I started looking at this assertion that, hey, maybe it's, maybe there is no curvature and we can see too far, I started doing the math. I looked at the equations, and obviously there's some more complex ones that have to do with spherical trigonometry, but the basic one of distance squared times 8 inches, all of those different equations are pretty accurate out to almost 1,000 miles, within feet of each other. So I realized pretty quickly, like, well, there might be some optical things that are going on, but I'm seeing stuff that I shouldn't see just right off the coast from where I live here. I can see Ibiza, way too much of it. So that was a big one for me. You talk about in the book the big five, which this is atomism, gravity, heliocentrism, evolution, and germ theory, and I think it's definitely a good synopsis. But you describe them as an occult conspiracy of monumental proportions to keep us dependent on centralized systems of control. And I think it's exactly that, but there's a deeper level, obviously a spiritual layer, which you touch on a great deal in the book as well. But those big five, maybe you can just touch on that a bit.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, this is what, I mean, in terms of like original work, I think putting those five together in that way is, the original part. But obviously I'm not the original person to debunk the globe or the viruses or anything. Lots of other people are way ahead of me. I've been doing this for years. And so but I was learning from them, and I wanted to kind of put it all together. I could see that like a lot of people are just like quite fixed in their fields, so you've got the people fighting against the viruses, you got people fighting against the vaccines, you got people fighting against heliocentrism and gravity, and some people fighting against atoms and quantum physics, but not that many. And so I had a very zoomed out perspective of it all, and I wanted to kind of like tie it all together. And this this idea of the Tower of Babel seemed like the perfect metaphor to describe it all. And so, so atomism would be the sort of bottom layer of this theoretical structure, because it's a theory that goes back over 2,000 years. And then with gravity, of course, being about 500 years old or so. And then heliocentrism, which is dependent on gravity, requires gravity to actually hold all the planets and stars together in the heliocentric model. So it's based on that. And gravity is based on atomism, because gravity is a theory that says that atoms have a force. The atomic nucleus has a force called gravity, which pulls other matter towards it. So gravity is actually a theory of atoms, based on atomism. And of course, the heliocentrism is like an atomic model of the sky. That was one of the first things I noticed in physics class, was like, wow, yeah, the solar system is just like the model of the atom, right? It's like the sun is in the center. It's like the nucleus is said to be a nuclear power source and a gravitational power source, which is the same as the atomic nucleus. It's said to be nuclear and gravitational. And then you have these electrons spinning and wobbling and orbiting around the nucleus. And then you have the same thing in the solar system. So originally I thought, that's neat. That's nature, right? It's like as above, so below. The microscopic is like the macroscopic, and that's all fine. But when you realize that the forces like that are supposed to be holding these models together, whether it's the gravitational force or the strong nuclear force or the weak nuclear force, these forces are completely contrived. Now, the electromagnetism is not contrived. Obviously, that's a real force. We can feel it, we can measure it, we can work with it, we can build things with it. But the three other forces that they say, of the four fundamental forces of physics, the three others, gravity, nuclear strong, and nuclear weak, are completely contrived. They're literally a made-up equation. It's not something that's like observed or measured or whatever. It's a made-up equation. It's just made up. It's pure sophistry.
Yeah, isn't the electrostatic force like 10 to the 36th times more powerful than the supposed gravitational force? Is that an
Something
accurate
like
number?
that.
It's like,
Yeah. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, gravity
so
is
you rub a
so
balloon on your head and it sticks to your head. That's like, 36 zeros more powerful than what they tell us gravity is.
Yeah. So I saw them all as being kind of like joined together, and with evolution as well, because so then evolution comes in next in terms of time scales. So evolution comes after heliocentrism. Excuse me. And yeah, because I noticed there's a lot of conflation between evolution and heliocentrism. So people talk about the evolution of the universe, right? And like how it started from a big bang, and there's all these atoms, and the atoms came together and made molecules, and it started wiggling and then made into bigger molecules and cells and slime and all this. And life is supposedly just built up from the wiggling of atoms and the force of gravity, essentially. So they
From goo
created
to
this
you by
whole
way of the zoo.
from goo to you by way of the zoo. Yeah. So they created this whole history of the universe, which actually combines evolutionary theory, which originally only applied to life, but they sort of extended it into the atoms and the molecules and everything to create this like Big Bang hypothesis. And yeah, so that relates in there. And of course, people who believe one tend to believe the others as well, right? You don't really get people who maybe like believe in evolution but dismiss heliocentrism, or maybe you do. Maybe it's a small group. I don't know, but it seems like it's all related and all part of a singular worldview. And what really topped it off for me was learning about the germ theory, which I didn't start learning about until 2020, until all this stuff started happening. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Are there really such a thing as viruses? Let's look into it. And then I just found all these people, great people, by the way, Stefan Lanka, Andrew Kaufman, Tom Cowan, Amanda Vollmer, Alex Zek, all these people and they're just laying it down like hard. They're just like, no, it's like, look, there's nothing, there's no proof. And so it wasn't a hard idea for me to take, because I knew there was theoretical science that people assume to be true, and then they run with it. They're just like, this is the theory, this is the theory, let's run with it. And so it was no surprise to me they'd do the same with viruses.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if there's no physical evidence of viruses, you can't hold them in your hand, you can't, test them properly, then it's like nothing they're saying about the pandemic is real, and none of it makes any sense. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
if you haven't isolated something and proven it exists, then you can't make claims about it.
yeah, exactly. So it was just bizarre. Like, it was like the Twilight Zone, man, and like trying to like talk to people about this, was, obviously people were like would aggressively reject any criticism of COVID or anything like that. So very bizarre. So I became quite isolated throughout 2020. I shut down my Facebook account. I was just no longer wanted to be on there anymore. I thought, I'm going to be a hermit. I'm just going to, focus on my work and write a book and stuff. And so I did. And I probably need to be less of a hermit now and kind of come out of my shell a bit. But, I wrote the book, and I really got everything off my chest and tried to make it as accessible as possible. And, I'm not a hater. I don't hate people who have a different opinion from me. But I guess I feel like if I was going on like Twitter and posting my opinions, then it probably would come across as more combative or more hateful, or because I see so much, there's so much conflict on social media. But I'm
Yeah, it was the Twilight Zone, and I didn't go off Facebook, but there was a whole lot of places where I just wouldn't even bother to express an opinion because
yeah.
I could see that it was pointless. It was like a herd of people who don't think for themselves would attack you. So
Yeah. It was wild. I saw people like, people would just post things like, oh, I just tested positive, for the sniffles or whatever. And they get like 500 likes, They get like more likes than they've ever had in their lives, more than they got for their wedding, more than they got when their children were born. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And it was like Facebook was like promoting everyone who supported the COVID narrative and completely shadow banning or canceling people who were saying, oh, actually, yeah, I had that injection, and now I'm like the side of my face is like drooping or whatever. They're like, right, you're banned. Get out of here. It was just awful. I mean, I'm like, it's like crimes against humanity, but so I just couldn't even be on Facebook anymore. And so I came off of that, and I started a Telegram channel, which is quite small still, but I wanted to just focus on writing the book and just focus on my family. And because I'd had quite a public life before that, from like 2010 to 2020, I was posting a lot online. I was traveling the world and sharing a lot about myself. And as 2020 was approaching, I was actually feeling like I really just wanted some privacy. And then when the whole world just went bananas, I'm like, right, that's it. I just want my privacy now. Yeah.
well, your time was definitely well spent. The book is, beautifully written. It's short and sweet and packed with a lot of great information. And it's like a primer course for people who haven't gone down these avenues when it comes to their thinking. And that's where all that work you put into the pseudoscientific degree that you got, that's where it's paid off, right? Because also having those letters after your name gives you a modicum of authority that will open, at least maybe potentially open people's minds to what you're talking about, because you suddenly are an authority.
Well, yeah. So I was, again, I hadn't really. Well, the whole issue of authority was, something that came up a lot in 2020 as well, because I tried to talk to people about, virus theory and stuff like that. And it was clear that they're just not going to believe me because I have no authority, right? I'm not an authority on anything or anyone. I wasn't at that time anyway. And, I realized I only have authority on my wife and children. That's it. They're the only people who actually look to me as some kind of authority on this situation. But everyone else around me, they're looking to the authorities, right? The government, the news media and stuff like that. And again, I'm not a hater. I've just come to accept that there are a large amount of people who will not change their mind unless they are told so by the biggest authority in the land, whomever that is. There are loyalist people. There are people who are loyal to the state, and the state could be corrupt. The state could be an old man who can barely even, like Joe Biden or whatever, but they'll still be loyal to the state. And I've just accepted there are a lot of people who are like that. And I think this is why it's important that we actually, change what's being done at the top levels, rather than just fighting everybody over what they believe. And so, yeah, it's like you need to have a change in the education system, really. Otherwise, for every one person you wake up, there's another million people that are just getting like programmed, like, through the meat grinder or whatever. So,
well, you mentioned the Tower of Babel and atomism
yeah.
and these different layers, and interestingly enough, that's basically like the pyramid structure but twisted, right? And so at the very top of that academic tower, you have all of these societies that are said to be the arbiters of truth. That they're the highest levels of science that we can really trust. Places like the Royal Society and the Nobel Committee and these sorts of things. And obviously when you get into heliocentrism, you start to find out, wow, there's a lot of stuff being peddled. I mean, geocentrism, there's a lot of stuff being peddled that is not, that there's no foundation there.
Mm-hmm.
Like LIGO, for example. Maybe you can summarize that, a little bit for people who might not understand that. But that's said to be one of the proofs that gravity exists. And that won the Nobel Prize for physics, the people who were involved in that experiment. And when you dig into what they actually claim to have done, it's just such a farce, and billions have been poured into that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar, I suppose, to the original test of gravity, the Cavendish experiment. It's an extremely sensitive apparatus that as I just argue, like you're talking about the tiniest like phase shifts in like light beams, that could be attributed to anything, frankly.
Yeah,
I mean,
what do they say, like a billionth the width of a proton or something like that? Isn't that what they claim to
it's like
have
a phase
measured?
shift, the billionth of a width of a proton. You're like, oh yeah, that definitely must be caused by that star that's 10 trillion light years away.
Right. So you have, they're making their claim based on a supernova, right?
Yeah.
And that they supposedly measured this fluctuation in the space-time, field.
Yeah.
And it was a one-time occurrence that they can't repeat, right? Because it was a supernova. So that's like the opposite of the scientific method, which should be repeatable, scalable, predictable, like all of these things.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're parading that around like, hey, we proved gravity. And I'm just really?
No, you didn't. No, you didn't, as they say in Scotland. No, you never. No, yeah, it's yeah, I mean,
one of your quotes in the book is, the whole canon of modern physics is essentially a fruitless intellectual exercise. And I like the way you pronounce evolution, because it really is. Because you also said that evolution occults creation, because when it gets down to it, the deeper you go into this, you realize that these are really physical, spiritual, metaphysical subjects, and that the people who are at the highest levels are occult magicians, essentially casting spells in the minds of humanity.
Yes, I mean, look, I wanted to believe that everyone is sincere and trying their best, and I believe there probably are a lot of scientists in there who are doing their best, and they believe the dogma, they believe what they're taught, and they're running with it. But undoubtedly, at the high levels, there is mockery and counterintelligence, misinformation going on, and I think that just became really apparent in the last 4 years. It was, just the absolute calamity of like madness and non-science and everything that's been going on. It really just showed, I think, the whole system for what it is. Because all those academics who believe in, quantum and gravity and all that kind of stuff. They all believe in vaccines and mRNA and viruses, and they're pushing the whole thing. And of course, I'd seen that no one actually sincerely responds to the challenges online. When I first saw this flat Earth stuff, I thought, oh, the academics will come out in force. That NASA and the academics and everyone, they'll come out in force and debunk all of this. But they don't. They just block it and like hide away and completely refuse to acknowledge it, whilst continually putting out bad science, and there's all these people on the internet that are doing really good work. They're documenting it, they're using the scientific method, they're proving it, and another person's independent people are verifying what they're doing. It's all like real science is being done on the internet by people, some of whom have science degrees, some of whom don't. But you don't need a science degree to do real science. Okay, if you want to do it and you know what you're doing, anyone
Yeah, you don't
do
have
it.
to be an expert in the field to engage in rational thinking and to be able to spot fallacious reasoning in somebody who's an expert in a field that's not yours. That's the thing. It's like, oh, I'm not an expert in this, so I better not say anything. And obviously people are afraid to commit academic suicide by going out there and saying things. So it's amazing though. You can post Christine Massey's 200 FOIA requests around the world asking governments and regulatory agencies like, hey, where's your scientific evidence? Can you point to an actual study where you're isolating and proving the existence of this supposed pathogen? And you can post something like that and it's like crickets after. They're not like, wow, that's a weird anomaly. Maybe I should look into this more and find out more. I thought it existed. It's like, no, that's not something you can fake. Those are actual official documents from governments that they're like, no, we don't got that information. Like, you should have that information in droves.
Should have been the first thing. I mean, I was literally my first thought when I, because a few people had said, oh, there's this coronavirus thing happening. I'm like, don't worry, it's just the news cycle. It will be gone in a few weeks. And people are like, no, I think this might be something that's going to last a bit longer. And I'm like, all right, I'll look into it. And so I start looking into it. And I'm like, there's something right here. And then, as I say, I was lucky. I quickly found Stefan Lanka. Dr. Stefan Lanka wrote a paper called Dismantling the Virus Theory. I can't remember what year it was, but it's quite old now. But and that was brilliant, So I was lucky to find that on a search engine. Probably not as easy to find these days as it was then. But and
you have Sam Bailey's work, A Farewell to Virology, which is pretty technical, but that's been put in a 3-part series by Steve Falconer of Space Busters. In a way that's really accessible to the common person who doesn't have an academic background. Really showing the pseudo-science that is virology. There was something you mentioned, going back to those big 5. I thought it was really interesting because you said each one of those, the atomism, gravity, heliocentrism, each one comes with their own boogeyman. And those are the tools of control that we're all being subjected to is that fear factor. And then everyone's afraid to speak out. When I was in Mexico, I was walking down the street and I caught up to a guy who was walking and we started talking to each other. And he was a musician who was, telling me about how disappointed he was with his musical heroes, that it was just crickets through COVID, where nobody dared to speak out against the machine, and say, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Like all of those 60s and 70s musical rebels that were like, got to stick it to the man and, fight. And, they all just flipped and like started promoting jabs. And, it was just like, what the heck? And so he was really disappointed about that. And I said, there's this song that you should listen to. It's called There Ain't No Rock and Roll. It's fantastic.
It's so good.
It's all about exactly what you're talking about. This is after 2-3 minutes walking with the guy, and he started laughing. He's like, I wrote that song.
So it was him.
it was Brad Skistinis of what's
5 times August.
5 times August. Yeah. who also, I think he's going to be at Music in Sky this year. He's a fantastic musician, but
Yeah, that's a great
it was
song, that
it
one.
was
It brought a
such a
tear to my
wonderful
eye. Like, it's really
synchronicity.
good.
Like, I just met the guy, and like in 3 minutes of walking through random conversation, I'm recommending he listen to a song that he wrote. Like, what are the odds of that? Yeah. But
Yeah, the music thing, I mean, yeah, it was it was strange. I mean, I didn't really have many big idols, I suppose, but yeah, the way everyone got on board with it, I mean, I thought it was like a group consciousness thing, because I must admit, in my experience in the music industry, I always felt like an outsider everywhere I went. I mean, and technically I was, because I was an international DJ, so I would be invited to go and play, and I would be, you know, I'd be an outsider in a different country where like almost like everyone at the party seemed to know each other, but so I was always an outsider everywhere. It seemed like everyone else in the industry sort of knew each other, or I mean, certainly at the upper levels, it seems like there's a club, if you know what I mean, that everyone's in a club, and they talk about the big club. Right? It's a big club, and you ain't in it, right? I definitely felt that in the music industry, and yeah, and of course, everyone who was in the club all got on board with tyrants and all that kind of stuff. But people who weren't in the club, some of them spoke out, but some of them either just didn't say anything, and some of them probably just ended their careers there and then. They're just like, you know what, I don't want to be in this business anymore. And I understand that. I've been kind of like, I've had like sort of one foot in the grave with my music career. I still work on music. I don't get bookings anymore. I mean, I've got one booking this year rather, but and but yeah, the whole buzz, the buzz and excitement that was around the music, it just got completely killed in 2020, and it's kind of hard to build that up again, especially now I'm like 46. I'm not, I don't really care about going to parties and stuff. So yeah, like building up all that buzz that I had before just seems like a massive task that I don't know if I could do again. But I'm moving into a new sort of career now as an author, but I will continue to make music, of course, but it'll probably be a bit different from what I've done in the past.
Someone just asked what a FOIA request was. It's Freedom of Information Act is what that is. It's when you ask a government authority, like you send them a request for information that's not classified. And did you perform at Boom in Portugal?
Yes, a couple of times. Yeah, once in
Uh-huh.
2012 and then again in 2018. But I went to Boom in 2008. That was the first time I went just as a punter. But then I ended up playing in 2012 and 2018 as well.
I was there 10 years ago, and what an experience that was.
Yeah.
I had never been to anything like that. For people who don't know, that's like the European equivalent of Burning Man. It's like the biggest trance dance psychedelic festival that you can find in Europe, or at least it was back then. I don't know if it's been surpassed by some other event. They're all over the place now, those kinds of events. Going back to this idea of evolution, occult's creation, and this whole idea. One of your quotes is, atomism is fundamentally nihilistic and justifies all kinds of debauchery, materialism, and hyper individualism. And I think that kind of sums up Burning Man and Boom in a nutshell,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And I was on board with that stuff. Like, I wanted to write books. I had a whole book I wanted to write on the subject of the archaic revival, a term coined by Terence McKenna, and the importance of these plant medicines in expanding awareness and helping to heal and heal humanity as a whole, because we're desperately in need of an awakening and something. So I saw that. That's why I had a personal renaissance when it came to these things. But I also, as a result of going to Boom and some other experiences that I had, began to awaken to the understanding that there's a whole lot of nefarious stuff that's going on in those communities that is deeply occulted when it comes to all the mainstream podcasts, and it's always being presented in this this lovey-dovey, like you're going to find your true self kind of a context, and they're not really talking about the risks and the pitfalls, and this idea that maybe what we're really talking about is a spiritual warfare.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So the last boom I went to, I actually had a pretty bad time, even though I performed and my music set went well. And I gave a talk on audio alchemy in the liminal village there. Now, they recorded all the talks. I had an audience of about, I don't know, 300-400 people, captivated, standing ovation. I gave a great talk about alchemy. It's on YouTube. The guy who filmed it put it on YouTube, but it was interesting. Boom Festival, the account, never shared it. They shared literally every single one of the other talks given at the festival, but never shared my talk.
Why do you suppose that was? I mean, if it was intentional.
Yeah. Well, it started giving me a clue as to the kind of people who run these events and what their aims are, right? Because I mean, Boom actually has a stage called the Alchemy Circle. So I thought it is a kind of alchemy what goes on at these festivals, of course, you know. Yeah, so I made a talk that I thought was very relevant and dropped some ancient knowledge and just about what I'd been doing in Hawaii and all this kind of stuff. And as I say, it went off like it was, standing ovations and people lining up to talk to me afterwards and everything. But the festival deemed it like unfit for being shared on their page, despite sharing all the other talks, So that was the first time I encountered censorship.
What do you think was like one of the key points that they had found fault with?
I don't know exactly. I mean, it's I went through like the 7 steps and some of the differences between like alchemy and modern science, and I haven't watched it for a few years, but it was essentially the first presentation I gave.
Oh, you still have a copy of the recording?
Yeah, I've downloaded it.
I'd love to see that.
As I say, the guy who filmed it was just a guy who was filming all the talks, and he put them on YouTube. So I actually had the talk. I got the talk early on. It was on YouTube, but it wasn't shared on the Boom Festival channel or on the Boom Festival site. But I was following them and watching them as they shared one talk, and then a few days later another talk and another one, sharing all these talks, and then just like not going to share mine for some reason. So when I started understanding like how much alchemy is censored and is occulted and is hidden, and even things like I talk about in the book, the Harry Potter, right? The first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and then they censor it and change it to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I think the only reason for that can be that they don't want people knowing about the Philosopher's Stone. They don't want people looking into it. They don't want, it's like, because it's like it's a key to alchemical knowledge. If you just put that into a search engine or start looking that up, you're going to find book after book and all this like amazing knowledge. But if you look up Sorcerer's Stone, of course, there's nothing. It's just been made up for,
alchemy is a definite threat to the heliocentric model, big time, because basically we live in this false dichotomy of scientism versus alchemy, where they say the whole that whole alchemical thing, that was superstition and pseudo-science, and now we've come so far and we've evolved, and now we're true scientists, and nothing could be further from the truth, because they've divorced spirit and matter, which is ridiculous. And they think of consciousness as this epiphenomenon that just happens by random chance when a system becomes complex enough. And like everything about the model is ridiculous when you really think about it. But that's what's peddled as the main, the highest level of scientific achievement. So it's false dichotomy, big time. And as Michio Kaku himself said, and you had it in your book, nobody uses the scientific method.
Guesswork. It's by the seat of your pants.
I call it a theory tale. I mean, obviously, we use science for the creation of these devices we're using right now, but when it comes to theoretical physics, it's just a big, giant theory tale.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I've realized is that a lot of these theories, because they are of the mind, they actually maybe like do tell you some interesting things about the mind, like obviously quantum physics, a lot of people find quantum physics very interesting, but it's sort of interesting from a purely mental perspective, about like how the mind works and stuff. And the same with like viruses, because what is, the only thing that's actually viral is information, like the mind, like ideas, right? It's like they're able to duplicate
Memes.
themselves, and spread and everything. It's like, so we talk about viral videos or viral ideas and things like that, and that's correct. It's like information is viral, but we're being taught to believe in a particle which is able to reproduce and swim around and attack people and stuff like that. And that's, again, no evidence for any such thing. So yeah, so sometimes these theories, they do tell you sort of interesting things about how the mind works, but it's this claim that they are telling you how something physical that you can't see and you can't perceive, but you got to trust that it's there because the theory says so. That's the kind of stuff that I'm going after here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One of my favorite chapters in your book, and I love the chapter title, was Hawking Isn't Talking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like the way
Hawking.
they parade these false heroes in front of us and get everyone to believe that they're the most brilliant minds in history. It's quite the trick.
Yes, indeed. So Stephen Hawking really should be the death nail in the coffin of gravity and heliocentrism, right? Really, I mean, there's no reason. It's a completely untenable position to believe in gravity now after, the Stephen Hawking revelations. Of course, a lot of people still don't know about any of that because it's censored and stuff, but yeah, that was the big one. I mean, I remember well being at university, and it was like Stephen Hawking was on the TV, like, every other week. There was all these physics documentaries, and I'm like, yeah, thinking this is it, and he's the man,
with
and
the twitch of a
he's like the greatest genius
using
ever.
binary. Like, that's how, well, all he does is sit and think all day long. So he's got the time. So he, what else is he going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, oh my gosh, I can't believe I fell for it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
cruel, but
I read Brief History of Time. I read, what was it, Baby Black Holes and Something Universes. It's just, wow. the things I believed.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, they weren't actually teaching us about Stephen Hawking at university, which is interesting, right? It's like he was on the TV, but of course he's associated with Cambridge University, and so you think, well, he must be working at a level that's just way beyond what us mere undergrad students are learning, right?
Of course.
But then you look into it, it's like, well, I did general relativity. I did a whole module on it, passed the 3-hour exam. I did all, solve the Schwarzschild radius and, did all the tensor calculations and everything. Like, I actually did it and passed the exams. But I'm still like, what has Stephen Hawking done? Nothing. Like all the stuff about Hawking radiation and black holes and everything. It doesn't, I don't think they teach that stuff in universities. I mean, maybe they do in Cambridge or Oxford, or it was Cambridge where he is. But
they don't teach Béchamp, when it comes to it comes to terrain versus germ theory. They don't teach in cardiology. They don't teach the works of Francisco Torrent Guasp, who completely revolutionized our understanding of the heart. Like these are titans of thought that are just like, it's just, silent. The silence is deafening when it comes to these subjects.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we, like you and I, we love understanding and seeking out new information and like adjusting our perspective based on new information. But academia, it just became clear, is like totally like rooted and determined
Dogma.
to maintain a certain view of the world, and will only uphold scientists and theories that support that view. Anything that challenges it you'll be out on your arse, basically. Yeah,
and I mean, going back to Hawking, you're talking about a guy who's diagnosed with ALS, which normally people die within 5 years of their, having received that diagnosis, and then he lived for like 40 after that or something. I don't know what the exact
55
number.
years.
55 years with AL. I mean, it's like that should get people wondering right off the bat. That is a severe neurological degenerative disease that takes everybody out eventually. And he's there writing books, twitching his cheek muscle.
Yeah, and he managed to have three children.
Oh yeah, the
as
kids.
well, while he was crippled.
Think about it.
Yeah, I don't want to think about that, but yes, it's so strange, and just the way he just kept on going like that, and was just in everything, like all over the place, just always appearing as like a guest on this and a guest on that and everything. Like to imagine a man who can't actually talk or walk or move, doing all that stuff.
I remember being so excited when he was on Star Trek.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say.
I know, dude. I've seen every episode of Star Trek. Yeah, I was a total Trekkie. Like, yeah. I mean,
Well, going back to the intellectual exercise idea, when it came to heliocentrism, like most people have a knee-jerk reaction to the flat Earth thing. It's natural. I did as well. My friend Alex Michael had to bring it up twice before I thought, okay, I'll spend the 5 minutes it takes to debunk him. And then I ended up in the deepest rabbit hole of my life while I tried to do that. And that's what they say. That's how you become a flat Earth. You're either really gullible and you just accept flat Earth because like, oh, it makes sense to me. And, or you're somebody who's methodical and you go deep into it. And I saw it as a fun intellectual exercise. I don't understand this knee-jerk reaction that people have. I'm like, wow, if there's anything, to it. But once I got deeper and deeper into it, I realized this isn't a simple subject at all. It's very complex. And this is an incredible tool for teaching rational thinking and logic and logical fallacies. And why weren't we like role playing these kinds of things as kids in school? Like one side takes the globe and the other takes flat Earth, and trying to, rectify this. And there's a reason we're not, because they don't want us looking at it all. And that's why it's all ad hominem attacks and it's all appeals to ridicule. It's like one fallacy after another.
Yeah. It's it's a sorry state to see the how almost everything online flat Earth just descends into like a mudslinging match between globe tards and flat tards, even though the actual conversation has progressed so much in 10 or more years now. It has been discussed very, very thoroughly. Like literally all the questions you might possibly have been answered many times over. And sure, it can be hard to find. I mean, I mentioned Dave Weiss, of course. He's been working super hard to put it out there, and he's got a great resource as well in that the app that he's got, the Flat Earth Sun Moon Clock app.
They brought him on as a warm-up act before my presentation in Acapulco.
Oh yeah.
That's a joke. I specifically requested to follow him because I knew it was going to be a full house, and I want.
Yeah.
No, but I figured at least he can crack people's brains open with these, subject. But it turned out like 90% of the people there or more were already on board with the idea that maybe heliocentrism was pseudo-science. So but he knocked it out of the park. Actually, he just posted that presentation. It's only 45 minutes, and it's on his channel. It's one of the best synopses of the subject that I've seen. Like visual, really compelling, super fast paced. So that's a good one. I can definitely recommend it.
Yeah, he's great. He just nails it every time. He's just got really thick skin, and he knows everything. Every like sort of like angle of it. And he's built up a huge resource, to help people understand it. So I mean, people have to want to learn. They have to want to learn and grow. Like, but because a lot of people they don't want it, right? It's like it's too triggering, because I think it's not just a case of, because obviously your reality doesn't look any different, before and after believing in the globe. I mean, the world still looks exactly the same to your eyes, but it's just a case of your mind, your model of reality coming in line with your actual senses, instead of having one thing you see with the senses and another whole model of reality that you believe in your mind, you know. So it's just coming to your senses, as it were. And
well, my cursor is on a note that I had here of how many convoluted explanations that contradict our sense experience are we required to accept in order to believe the prevailing model? And it's like all of them. Right?
Yeah. All
We're
of them.
moving, but you don't feel it. The horizon's curved, but you don't see it.
Yeah.
We see things that are way too far away, but that's all optics. And it's just like one thing after another, where the only way you can believe it is if you deny your sense experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Reject the evidence of your senses and trust the experts. You know, that's it. And like, but there's a whole lot of science that isn't like that and that works very well and is very practical. And so yeah, as I guess as life went on, I mean, it's been 20 years now since I finished my PhD. That differentiation between that science that you can actually do and science that's just a belief system that we've been programmed with, you know, that the differentiation between those two types of science, as it were, started to get clearer and clearer, you know, and was ultimately, yeah, really the inspiration for the book. I mean, in the very beginning of the book, I was just going to write about audio alchemy because that was like my own sort of theory, as it were. But I thought, actually, you know, before I can tell people about audio alchemy, there's a lot of preamble that I need to get through. I need to like show how alchemy is in contrast to modern science and everything. Because I found that when teaching people about alchemy, that it was hard to get through to them because they are still coming from this other worldview, and alchemy is literally a different, you know, different worldview altogether. Which, as I say, I think modern science has been designed to occult alchemy. So, evolution occults creation. The germ theory occults healing, essentially, because when you believe viruses cause disease, then the whole idea of healing just goes out the window. Like, it's like you've got to kill the bad guy, right? It's not about healing your body. It's about killing the enemy or that you're being attacked by. So it kind of...
And nature is the enemy in that model.
Yeah. So it goes from a model of healing to a model of war. And that's why, you know, healthcare is all like needles and drugs and, you know, knives and everything. I mean, it's literally like they're trying to fight the disease, but the disease is just a feeling, as it were, a dis-ease of, you know, while your body is attempting to heal itself. And so, yeah.
A detox.
Anyway, yeah. So I forget where I was going with that. So yeah, so each of the theories, they kind of have their own boogeyman, and they all like occult different aspects of alchemy. So quantum physics, what I realized when I got down to it was that it's hiding transmutation. So they tell you in physics you can't transmute metals, right? It's impossible. You can't transmute one thing into another. So it hides transmutation. It hides radiant materials like radium and things like this, which are, you know, materials that can produce like light and heat for a long time. So those have been hidden, and that's the whole nuclear thing, right? The whole nuclear
radiation
thing with Galen Windsor, yeah, and essentially hiding from us the truth of these amazing materials. And the truth that metal can actually be made by mixing metals together with fire and so on. That's kind of hidden by quantum mechanics. And then heliocentrism brings in things like aliens and asteroids. These are like new enemies that like people didn't have long ago, right? But when you start believing in heliocentrism, there's now this possibility that there's going to be space aliens come and get you, or giant rocks going to fall out of the sky and destroy the earth and all this. So so with each, and I would say gravity as well is materialism. Like gravity and atomism is like translates to materialism or materialistic thinking, or like you say hyper individualism. because it's all about the matter. All the power is in the matter, right? And it's all like pulling down, like it's like there's no spiritual component to anything. It's just matter. And so, yeah, so each of these theories has like a philosophy attached to it and a scare factor attached to it. And ultimately, none of them can actually be used to do anything or create anything, right? You could create a documentary about gravity or create a documentary about quantum physics, but can you actually create a thing like an application of science? And
Well, we got Tang
on.
from NASA.
We got what?
Tang.
Tang or memory foam. Memory foam, yeah.
Velcro. I think there. Yeah,
Velcro. It's like, yeah, $55 million a day, and yeah, for the last 60 years, and they gave us foam.
I coined the term prospiracy a while back, just to emphasize the opposite of conspiracy, because obviously when you start to pull back the veil on this stuff, you go down some pretty dark rabbit holes, and it can freak a lot of people out, make them very paranoid, depressed. The world is a hellscape, but on the other side of that, there's also a whole, you mentioned the nuclear thing and you mentioned germ theory, is that it's actually very freeing, because when you dig into, say, nuclear power and bombs, and you start to find out, wait a minute, like you mentioned Galen Windsor, and he used to like eat uranium on stage, if I remember correctly. I think you mentioned that in the book, and lived to be like 80 something, 88 or something like that. And so I think it's an empowering thing. Like you also mentioned the meteorites coming in, that's something like every week NASA's like, we've just identified another one and it's on a trajectory, and it's going to miss us by 47 elephants width or something like that. They got all these weird things that they measure the size of these things and how close they are. It's like it's such a joke, but you ask a bunch of people who've become geocentrists, like how much are you afraid of the Earth being wiped out by another asteroid strike? It's like 0% of them are afraid of that. So it's an empowering thing where all of a sudden this fear factor loses its power over you. And nuclear power, same thing. You dig into Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you find out that they were rebuilding in those cities days after the bombings, that you didn't have some gigantic spike in cancers in those areas after dirty bombs and radioactive material probably very much exist, but it's not what they tell us. And Chernobyl as well. I remember them talking about nuclear winters and nothing will grow for thousands of years because of the the radiation after the bombs are exploded. And yet Chernobyl is a thriving ecosystem now. There's drone footage flying over, and it's less than 50 years or something since that happened. And it's just like, if anything, it's causing greater growth. And there's a lot to suggest that that's why things like radium have been occulted, because they actually do have healing properties as well as being potential tools for limitless energy sources. So that's why I like that term prospiracy, because it's something that's really positive. And same thing with germ theory. You're like, how many of us in this crazy community are worried about a pathogen jumping on us and killing us? Like, nobody. So that's a very empowering thing in today's world.
It is. I mean, I talked about that a little bit in the book, that what it was like, and I didn't go, there's so much more I could have said, but because I was afraid. I just wasn't afraid of germs. I was afraid of the fact that the government wants to kill us all. You know what I mean? I was like thinking that the media basically wants me dead, and they're writing articles which are essentially drumming up hate, and to the point where, I mean, I'll maybe have to dig it out sometime, but there was an article in the Mirror, which is a horrible like tabloid rag in the UK, but they put out an article where it seemed like they were trying to encourage normal people to go out and start attacking people like myself. I mean, it was like terrifying. I literally thought, this is what they're going to do. They're going to like whip up all the COVID believers and get them to, start attacking the others, because we're the worst people in society now and everything. And so I was scared. Yeah, I was worried about like mobs of, masked like torch wielding people coming out of my house and everything. I was properly scared of a lot of things during that time, but I was never for 1 second scared of catching a virus, because there's no evidence of viruses existing, so it's just, yeah. It was a very, very strange and very challenging time.
We have far more things to be concerned about.
To worry about,
far more. But I mean, the prospective thing is wonderful, because some of those big ones that most people are afraid of, you can kind of dismiss those. But I mean, for example, all of these critical thinkers that are rebels and not buying into all the bullshit, we're very well mapped out in the digital world, and everyone's walking around with their phones, and unless you're one of these paranoid Luddites that is tried to completely remove yourself from society, we would be really easy to round up if they wanted to. So that was a real concern for me, and it's definitely,
because I remember one of the first things, like early on, I went out somewhere just to the shop or something, and I was in Tesco car park, and I was just putting the shopping in the car, and I got a text from the government. Now, I've never had a text from the government in my life. A text from the government saying, "Go back to your house, immediately. Everyone must go and stay in their homes," right? And of course, I thought that it was a personal. I thought it was a personal. I thought they'd monitored my phone, seen that I'd left my house, and then texted me to tell me to go home. So I was like, at that point, I was just like terrified. I'm like, they're tracking my every move and everything. Of course, I found out a little while later that everyone in the country got the same text at that time. So it wasn't personal, at me necessarily, but it was that kind of thing. It was like they could be listening to everything I'm saying, seeing everywhere I'm going, seeing everything I'm looking at online. I just felt completely exposed, and like that these people, whoever's behind this whole thing, could, I felt just super vulnerable, and like they could just do anything to me at any point. So, I wanted to just pull inward. I didn't feel inspired to like get the camera and be like, "Hi everyone, look, I'm not wearing a mask," and like try to be like some martyr and be like, "Yeah, you shouldn't obey the rules." And there was a lot of people doing that who their accounts just disappeared, and I've not even seen them since. It's like,
there was the whole purge. Huge channels got taken down. I was interviewed by one that had 750,000 subs, and they took him down on total false pretenses. But there's also a class action lawsuit now, because they were false pretenses, and they were stomping on the First Amendment in the U.S., at least when it comes to freedom of speech, and they were overstepping their bounds as platforms and getting into the mediation of the flow of information. So it'll be interesting to see if anything comes of that. But I was really impressed. Like Brian Stavely, that guy was flying. He was flying without a mask during that time period.
Yeah,
that guy's got balls of steel. Like I definitely would not have dared. But there's so many things that's like people don't realize that when it comes to like just simple stuff like those scanners at the airport, who knows what the hell those are doing to us and what they're altering or how they're radiating us. And everyone just lines up like sheep. And it's like, I think it was Amanda Vollmer had a 1-minute video just saying, you don't have to do this. And all you do is you just say, I'd like to opt out, and, or say, oh, this gives me headaches or whatever. And they'll just like escort you through that. The last time I flew, it was like, they didn't even pat me down. I was like, I'd like the pat down. They got backed up. And so they let me and 5 other people through without even running us through the machine, just because I said that. So I might've saved some lives there. I don't know. But, I told my daughter, she was flying, and she came out of that. She was like, she video called me. She's like so excited. She's like, I felt like I had a superpower. It's like, yeah, the superpower is opt out. Like it's an offer. It's not a true mandate. There's no laws on the books. It's just the illusion of authority, and everyone is gobbling it up and believes it like it's true. And so it's really powerful. The more you know, the more you can fight the system.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've not tried that opting out of the scanners, but it's I think next time I go to the airport, I'm going to do it for sure.
Those things, if for some reason it jammed while you were in it, it could be devastating because of the amount of radiation that would be focused on one particular area of your body for the whole time you're standing there. So it's definitely
yeah, I mean, airports are such a shit show, honestly. I mean, that was, I mean, I might still be doing more gigs and international gigs if it wasn't for airports. I used to say like I get paid to travel and I play for free, because actually like playing the music is fun and usually enjoyable, but getting there and getting home is just an absolute torture. A lot of the time it's just like really bad, and I get home super depressed because of just having spent so much time in the airport zone.
That's what people haven't figured out yet about Alex Michael. They keep inviting him to different things, and they don't realize they've got to pay him to travel. He'll play for free, but he hates travel. He hates travel with a passion. He lives in a wonderful home, and he's like, I don't want to leave here. And I'm not going to subject myself to all of that humiliation and the nightmarish experience and the flight itself. And so they're going to have to sweeten the pot big time and pay him for travel if they want him to show his face somewhere else and perform live. And
that's it, man. I mean,
nobody's come anywhere near the price tag for that yet.
Because I have this O1 visa, which is an American visa for aliens of extraordinary ability, right? So that's
you are an alien. I knew it.
Yep, I'm an alien of extraordinary ability. Of course, legally, alien just means anyone who's not an American. I don't know if people realize that when they talk about aliens, but that's kind of what it means. It means a non-American. It's like a legal term for non-Americans. But yeah, like, so I got this alien of extraordinary ability visa. The second one I've had. And I had to go through like 3-4 months of application process, huge amount of detail, all my background, all these checks. Embassy interviews and everything, and then they decide that you are an extraordinary alien and you're now allowed to come and work in the US. But you still get treated like a terrorist at the airport. Right. You still get treated like a terrorist at the airport every single time. It doesn't matter how many background checks, how much I've been through this process. Every time
you need a diplomatic
airport, I'm a potential terrorist. And I've got to get in line, and I don't get any like special treatment. I don't get through fast or anything. But meanwhile, all these like no-name, nobody, like, people are just pouring in the southern border. And here's me, who's like, done every check, had everything, public person, yada, yada. And I still have to get in line and be treated like a terrorist every time I go to the States. It's just like...
It's truly a divine comedy, isn't it? It's like...
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we can go a little bit longer if you're up for it.
Sure. Yeah. Let's keep going.
Got some other subjects we can touch on here. Let me just read. This is from the first page of your book, and I love this quote. You wrote, "It's harmful to the development of the soul if we cling to those beliefs with which we are programmed at an early age. We have to be able to recognize when a belief has been installed within us by the surrounding culture, to be able to question and reprove it, understand why it's there, and ultimately detach from it if necessary. Purifying our inner landscape in this way is an important aspect of the great work of alchemy." And the second half of your book is all about alchemy, and it's really beautifully written. And I learned so many awesome things from it. And I think we can cover that in a future conversation. But maybe if you'd just like to speak a little bit to that idea of purifying the inner landscape and the great work of alchemy.
Yes, well, these theories, they do kind of like clutter up your inner, your brain essentially, because when you're you're taking in this information through your senses, and then you're interpreting it in terms of these artificial ideas that you've been programmed with. And there's a lady I know, for example, who's really into ozone therapy, and she's been, always saying that ozone is a triple oxygen molecule. And after reading my stuff, she's like, well, what is it? If it's not a molecule, what is it? I'm like, well, it's enriched oxygen. It's like, heavy oxygen, or, concentrated oxygen. But I don't think there's any evidence that it's actually a molecule, as and so she's had to kind of adapt, but she feels it very freeing, actually, because it's like, now you no longer have to look at things through and interpret it in a molecular way, or interpret it in a heliocentric way, or an evolutionary way, or whatever. I mean, you talked about Terence McKenna, and he was a big inspiration to me. I loved listening to his talks, and I read a bunch of his books, but he was very heavily in the evolution, in the Darwinism. Now, when I look back at Terence McKenna, I'm like, well, he was a great orator, but I mean, the stoned ape theory and everything, it's like he was like deep in evolutionary theory, and everything I think he was saying was based in evolution, essentially. But he was still a great orator. Yeah, and he did some great talks on alchemy and stuff. He was obviously very knowledgeable and very able to communicate. But his work doesn't have a lot of value now to me, because it's all rooted in evolutionary theory. So anyway, yeah. So
also, if you dig into the works of Jan Irvin of Logos Media and FOIA requests and whatnot, there's some stuff there that, I don't know, letter agencies, perhaps. I think a lot of the big names in the psychedelic renaissance are, ultimately involved in different nefarious agencies, and there's a, we could save that for another conversation as well. I think the whole psychedelia and the trance dance and Burning Man and how this ties into technocracy and the New Age movement and everything, it is a real cesspool when you dig into it. And and he and his brother, they're always brought forth as the luminaries that are waking so many people. But I think there's a lot of agendas at play, and whether he was consciously part of them or just a willful dupe, I don't know. But I suspect the former, not the latter.
Yeah. I think you might be right. I mean, it just seems that these people who like shoot up to be like highly influential almost always like have like people behind them, right, or some kind of agenda behind them, and that's sort of like how they became so influential. We can see that kind of like organically becoming one of the most influential people in the world doesn't really happen, as far as I can tell. It's I know it's
they've got egregores in the closet.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, culture is, it's a strange place, isn't it? There's just so many like actors who are, serving these like hidden agendas and like hidden hands and stuff. And it is a total minefield to like pick it all apart. And, I just hope the book can like help people. I think I wrote it from a personal perspective because, wanted to let people see it's rather than just seeing the facts. I think often when you go online to look at this stuff, people are just throwing facts at you, right? They're just saying this evidence, this fact, but it actually helps to understand it through a person's life. It was like Kelly Brogan said it to me. She said the medium is the message. It's like, it's not just a case of like reading the facts. It's like we want to see someone who's lived it, someone who's actually lived their lives this way. And so that's why I wanted to come forward with my experiences. Like, I did live the life of a theoretical physicist. I went and got the PhD and, believed all the science, trust all the science, did all the science, and then, just kept digging deeper. And ultimately it brought me to where I am now. And I'm fine, I'm okay. I'm not like dying from viruses all the time. I'm not getting flung off the spinning
Are you
ball into
really though?
space or anything like that. Sorry, getting viruses and so on. But yeah, like I mean, people might think if you don't take vaccines, you're going to be sick all the time, for example. But like everyone I know who doesn't take vaccines is like well healthy and like hardly gets sick. And
Careful, we're on the tubes of view here, but
oh, I forget. Sorry.
yeah, no, it's all right. One of the most interesting studies that I've seen that came out was where they were analyzing, jab hesitancy.
Yeah.
And they were looking at it based on education, and the two groups that were most likely to be hesitant were high school or lower education
Mm-hmm.
and PhDs.
Yes,
And
right.
the highest group were people who had masters.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but the way I interpreted that was when you're in your master's phase of your education, you're still very much a believer in the whole academic system and the scientific method, and you think that that's what you're championing.
Yeah.
And then by the time you've gone through your PhD, you realize what a farce mainstream academia is, and how much pseudoscience is being peddled as truth. And so isn't that interesting that the two groups that are the most likely to avoid it are people who they haven't been indoctrinated by the educational system,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they're trusting their intuition,
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the people who have gone through the most hardest education possible, and they're like, I'm not going anywhere near that, because they realize what a joke the whole system is. So that was a very, very telling study.
It was. Yeah, that's it. It's yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I totally agree. Yeah, it's either like fully indoctrinated or unindoctrinated, but if you're like you're like partially indoctrinated, then you're sort of more amenable to the lies and all these all the science, Excuse me.
Someone in the chat just asked, what's the main reason, in your opinion, why they lied about the Earth as they did?
Well, so this sort of goes towards what I'm kind of getting into now, but I mean, it all goes back to the Jesuits. And the heliocentrism is a Jesuit theory, and it was ultimately promulgated through Jesuit education centers. And they also own all the big telescopes. I mean, Dave Weiss has talked about this as well. We learned that. I mean, I remember learning that at university, that most of the big telescopes were owned by the Vatican. Which is strange. Because you're like, wait, but I thought religion was bunk. Why are they? Where's? But it all ties
Why
together.
Why did they call
right?
this telescope Lucifer?
Yeah, it
The
all
biggest
ties
binocular
together.
telescope in the world.
It's funny because I was on one of the Amazon, I think it was the Australian Amazon, and it was like looking at my book and some of the reviews, and there's like customers who bought this book also bought, right? And I had 3 other books, and they were all books about the Jesuits. And I realized like about the horrible things that this group called the Jesuits have done. There's a whole like history of terrible stuff. They're very secretive and so on. But
look up the Jesuit oath if you doubt that.
Yeah, the secret instructions of the Jesuits. Yeah, look up that and you'll get an idea. I mean, it's terrible. But anyway, so I didn't seeing that other people are reading. The category that Amazon has sort of put me in is like now in the sort of like Catholic heretic category, which wasn't really the plan, but just following the science really, and like where did heliocentrism come from? Well, that's where it comes from. It's a Catholic, it's pagan sun worship essentially, and then that gets into Roman Catholicism and how Roman Catholicism is not real Christianity. It's actually pagan sun worship that's kind of appropriated Christianity for its own purposes. And then that gets into like stuff such as the Da Vinci Code and all that, which it all again came up recently, and I'm now sort of involved in like the real life Da Vinci Code and everything. So it's just I couldn't have expected where this would all lead me, honestly.
And the current pope is the first Jesuit pope in history.
Right. Yeah.
Also, which is
Yeah.
an interesting factoid. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I won't go into it too much with the Jesuits, but that is where a lot of this stuff goes back to. That's where it originated, and I say that in the book. I mean, they talk about the Copernican revolution, as in like, oh, the Copernicus came up with this theory, and then suddenly everyone started believing the Earth was spinning. But they almost talk about it like I've heard it said, Copernicus set the Earth in motion with his theory, right? And it's like, well, he didn't set, the Earth didn't just start spinning when Copernicus created his theory, right? It's like it's just the same. The Earth is the same now as it was long ago. All that changed was the beliefs of the Catholic clergy, because there was about 200 years or so where it was a heretical idea. They didn't teach it in schools. And then they get in the 1800s and some Jesuit or a group of Jesuits decides they're going to teach heliocentrism in schools. And so that starts rolling out. And but there seems to be links with the Jesuits and the CIA and, MI5 and a lot of things. I mean, it's like all roads lead to Rome, right? So,
Yeah, I went to school in Padova, Italy for a year, which is where Galileo was a professor. According to the mainstream historical model, it's the second oldest university in the world after Bologna. And Copernicus also taught there. And so his lectern, where he supposedly gave the lecture about the heliocentric model, was there, and I got to see it with my own eyes, and it was so exciting to me. And it's interesting because in that town they have the largest piazza in Europe, a public square. And if you look at it on Google Earth, it's 4 sections with the cross going through the middle, and it's lined with all of these statues that are like your mainstream science, illuminaries. And if you look at it from up, it looks just like that 4-continent system that's at the north. So out of the town that gave us the heliocentric model, which wipes the whole flat earth map and these continents where Mount Meru perhaps is, and Rupus Nigra, all that, the biggest piazza in Europe is in that town, and it basically models that. It's like, to me, it's just like, it's truth in plain sight there, probably.
Yeah, it's all very fishy. And I mean, I've even wondered if it's all, part of some grand plan, there's going to be some like grand reveal or some switcheroo. And it was like, I don't know, some plan to like teach lies to the public for hundreds of years to like, some experiment or whatever. I don't know what the real reason is, or maybe it is just simply that they want to hide true science. And that's kind of what I've put forward in the book, really, is that the true science of alchemy is so powerful that they've come up with this whole, theoretical mumbo jumbo just to really distract people from ever finding out the truth. Which, yeah.
You have one of your quotes in the book is, "Pride puts ego above truth," and pride gets in immediately when it comes to this heliocentrism thing, because people can't even begin to fathom that they might have been duped about something so grand for so long, and then all those knee-jerk reactions and questions come up that they think are coming from within, but have just been programmed into them. They're not even aware. They don't even formulate the question. It's just there,
Yeah.
And then you wrote, at its extreme, it's a form of spiritual blindness and a backdoor for demonic influences to enter the mind and take over. And that kind of gets into this concept of the Egregor, which you also mentioned. Maybe you can riff on that a bit.
Yeah, the Egregor. This idea of a thought form, which it comes from a group of people and sort of like becomes its own thing. And I sort of make the comparison with corporations. Excuse me. And suggesting that a corporation is a type of egregor. Now, a corporation may form out of a legitimate need. Lots of people, they need something. People need shoes or whatever. So a corporation is created to make shoes. But we have a problem then when there's no longer a need. Let's say whatever a corporation is there, it's needed, and then it's no longer needed. But now there's this egregore that exists, and it needs to survive. The people need their jobs, right? It's like the corporation doesn't want to die; it needs to survive, but it can't make money. Where's it going to get money from? Well, you're going to turn to the bank, right? It's going to borrow money. It's going to, do whatever it can to like keep going. And I worked in a corporation where this was happening all the time. We were always on the brink of destruction, all finding a way to get more money to like keep the corporation going. And I think what we're seeing now with all this woke stuff is because the corporations, most of them are no longer needed, and they can't make a profit anymore. But they continue to exist because they're getting money from the bank, right? Or they're getting money from BlackRock and places like that. So they have to then, they have to push the vaccines. They have to push, wokeism and trans and homosexuality and all these things. And it's, so for me now, when I see a corporation pushing that stuff, I take that as this meaning that they have
And
no
that's the
use in the world
majority.
anymore. They're just being propped up by the devil, essentially,
Mm.
to continue to peddle sort of these agendas. And yeah, so the egregore, yeah, it's a powerful idea, and a lot of people, they give up their souls, their essentially their soul life, their independence. They give it up to serve these egregores, with the idea they're going to work their way up the corporation and get to the top and have loads of money and freedom. But are you really free when you get to the top of a corporation? I don't. I really don't think you are. I think you're deeper in it than anybody else. That's for sure.
Well, the corporation is an interesting word because it's literally corpse, dead. So and oration. So it's literally a dead man talking. And in the eyes of the law, a corporation is considered an entity like you or I, even though it's not. And so it has all the benefits of being a live being, but it isn't. And and then the concept of the egregore, for people who aren't familiar with that, is this idea that the more attention is focused on a particular idea or a subject or a company, a logo, an event like a Super Bowl, the more power that takes on. And whether or not it actually becomes an actual entity, a demon or whatever, I don't know. I suspect it probably does, or at least it becomes a conduit for those kinds of forces. But the fact is that regardless of whether it is or not, the effects are the same.
Yeah. And I notice, like, when corporate people talk, they talk in a completely different way from individuals. Of course they always talk about we, like we, because the corporation is a they them. And so they're always talking in that sort of plural sense, like on behalf of the corporation. But you see, if everyone quit their jobs, the corporation would have no voice, right? Because it's a non-living entity. It only lives by virtue of the living human beings that choose to talk in that way on behalf of the corporation.
Order followers.
Yeah.
I posted a meme yesterday. Who is more morally culpable, the one giving the orders or the order follower?
Yeah.
And obviously, to me, it's the order follower because, thinking of war, you get cronies that are sending young men off to war, but the young men are duped and they're the ones pulling the trigger and killing their fellow men.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's it. When you give up that's essentially when you're saying give up your soul. Soul is the root of like solo or solitude. It's like you're giving up your sort of individual capacity for choice and self-determination, right? That's really what it means when you give up your soul. You say, okay, like when you sign to a corporation or like a lot of these record label deals, which is another reason why the musicians couldn't talk, right? Because they're in these record label deals. And the record labels are joined up with pharmaceutical companies. They got the same shareholders, and it's all a big club, right? And you don't want to offend the people in the club because they gave you your career, essentially. But if you're an independent like myself, I don't. I mean, I own a record label, but I don't have contracts with anybody or anything like that. It's just like, I keep it simple. But yeah, so gosh, I forgot where I was going with that. Where was I going with that? Through the music. I got distracted by the music.
It's easily done.
So
I'm often
dead air.
distracted by
Sorry.
music.
Lost my train of thought there. But yeah, so we were talking about the egregor, yeah, and the corporations, and yeah, with the music and record label and so on. Yeah, so that's it. So a lot of these people who weren't able to speak out, it was because they had actually given up self-determination, right, to a company through a contract. And that company becomes like their sort of family in a way. It's like, so you'd be speaking out against your own family, the people who are providing for you and giving your career and stuff. So I think that's why a lot
and you're
of
also
artists
putting your
couldn't
own
speak out.
you're also putting your own livelihood on the line, because
Yeah.
that's your income source. And if you break your contractual obligations, then there are consequences.
Yes, yeah, and there was that sense, that for even myself, even though I'm independent, most of my money comes from Spotify and Bandcamp, and they could easily just switch that off if they wanted, and then I'd have to find another income source. But at the same time, yeah, it seems like a lot of things can be taken away from us. I mean, this is why I haven't started a channel like yourself, and then maybe should have, and maybe one day I will. But I was kind of put off of it because I felt like it could just be taken away from me, right, in an instant, because the platforms that I'm hosting the channel on are opposed to everything that I'm trying to say. And so that kind of, really just put me off. But with creativity, with like writing a book or making music, I mean, they can shut down the platforms, but they can't take away what I created. They can't take away the music. They can't take away my book, right? So I'll always have this, even if I get canceled or, whatever, I'll still have what I created, and I'll be able to start anew and do it another way. But yeah, I was thinking of starting a channel some years ago, and I just kept thinking, I'm only going to get so far, and then they're just going to take it all away, Maybe that was a bit pessimistic, but.
Well, I mean, that not in this current climate, and especially from 2020, it became very obvious that if you were speaking truth to power, then your entire platform that you might have spent years and thousands of hours developing could just vanish in a day, and it did for many people. I was very cautious about the kinds of subjects that I talked about, because the research on my channel is pretty unique, and it's it would be a shame if that all just disappeared because, I started talking about the wrong thing at the wrong time. It seems like whatever the current psyop is what you're not allowed to speak about. And then, give it a few months or 6 months and it's okay to talk about that, but you might not be able to monetize the video or something like that. But it's not like you put the whole platform at risk. But they make their own rules, and they can go back retroactively. And if they decide you're a threat or a nuisance, they can just get some trumped up charges and get rid of you that way. So but we do need to use their technology against them, and I think it's one of the things I really enjoy about Mike Winner is he's so broad in his approach, whether it's through Quartal and the platforms that they're creating. We need to use it to crack open minds as best we can, and if they get rid of us, it's like they martyr us, and then they bring more attention to the subject matter.
Yeah, that's it. And then you've just got to do it again, but do it with a bit more wisdom and experience. And there's a lot of people who got cancelled for multiple things, but then they come back stronger and make their own platforms and stuff like that. And so it's important to get the word out there. And so I do think a lot about starting a channel. I'm probably gonna do it at some point, but that's why I brought it up. But yeah,
I think you should. You have so many good things to say, and I think you would develop a good following in a short amount of time because of the network of people that you know. And if it gets taken down, so what?
Yeah,
it's there's so many things that we could talk about, and I don't want to I'm really interested in the concept of transmutation and the alchemy and the second half of your book. My channel has really focused on this idea of petrification, instant petrification, and my theories surrounding that have everything to do with transmutation of elements. And most people don't, I mean, that's not accepted in the mainstream model. You've got the periodic table that they give us, and then you have like the Walter Russell periodic table, which as soon as the very first time I saw that sine wave, you have a tattoo on your forearm that looks almost like that, don't you? Was that you? Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it up close, but the first time I saw it, I'm like, that looks like Russell's periodic table on, and the first time I saw that, I was like, yes, of course, that's it. That's how it works. And without I haven't gone deep into physics or into the chemistry, and I don't understand how all that stuff works, but I just intuitively sense that something like that is synthesizing cymatics and plasma physics and all sonoluminescence and all of these different things are all perfectly dovetailing when you see a model like that, as opposed to just like measure the measurements of atoms and their weight and protons and the current periodic table that we're given. And I forgot why I was going to bring that up. Oh no, transmutation, which the mainstream model doesn't acknowledge, right? That only happens in the heart of suns, where the atomic the gravitational force is so great that it's transmuting the elements, and then eventually it supernovas out into the cosmos, and that's how we get all of these different complex elements beyond hydrogen, helium, that are populating our physical universe, right? So transmutation, both from an alchemical perspective, but also this subject of petrification, and it's definitely something maybe you'd like to say a little bit about that, but I think we could go into depth with that in a future conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book called The Forge and the Crucible by Mircea Eliade, and it's they show how, like, long ago, I say long ago, maybe a few hundred years ago, and before that, like, transmutation of metal
Steve,
was.
Wait a second. You're getting all jumbled there. Let's give it a second and see if you come back. That was just poor connection.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Try
fine.
now. Yeah, no, it's on your side.
Everything seems to be fine here.
No problem. Okay. Well, maybe it's on my end. It says that Shiva says no problem on their end. Sorry to interrupt you. Go for it.
No worries. Yeah, there's a great book. I had it here called The Forge and the Crucible by Mircea Eliade, and they go really deep into the transmutation stuff from all these different examples throughout the world, from like big civilizations and small towns and all kinds of different ways. But yeah, essentially, transmutation of metals was commonly understood, until about 150 years ago, when we started with this atomic stuff, which of course physics says that, like you say, transmutation can only happen in the center of the sun or in a particle accelerator, with enough energy to slam like atoms together and everything. But metallurgists essentially are mixing metals in a hot crucible in a forge, kind of like soup, mixing things together until it's really hot and then letting it freeze. That was called smelting. By mixing metals together, even with non-metallic stuff like sulfur, salt, mercury, you can make any metals you can desire. I mean, you essentially, a metal is just a set of properties, and so you're essentially mixing together different properties with fire to create the set of properties that you want, and there's like they would say with regards to the Philosopher's Stone, and we could talk about that in a future episode as well. But that was alleged to be able to transmute lead into gold, and so the way they would do that would be to just put the lead in the crucible, melt it down till it's it's liquid, and then just sprinkle the Philosopher's Stone in there. If you a little pinch of the stone, and then heat it some more with some more fire, and then let it cool, and it would cool into gold. Which I mean, I don't know if you can do that, but I've read books of people describing that, people describing being in the room, watching that happen, everything that's like going on. But yeah, metals are made, in the earth from pressure and temperature. From earth being pressurized and heated, and like you're talking about petrification. There's all these processes that happen inside the earth, and essentially the alchemists are trying to simulate that. Trying to like recreate the pressures and the temperatures in the crucible to transmute the metal into whatever they want. And it was not a theoretical science. It was literally, as I say, like men stood in front of raging fires every day for thousands of years, like cooking up metals for all kinds of applications. Whatever the kings and queens and the royals that needed. The metals are like the foundations of civilization, like rock. It's like hard stuff that's unbreakable, that civilization is built upon. And yeah, so I think they don't want us knowing about transmutation of metals. They don't want to know that gold can be made. They want you to think that there's just a limited amount of it, and that it's only in the earth, and that they basically have most of it already, and it's in the Federal Reserve basement or something. But yeah, they definitely don't want you to know that gold can be made. Now, I'm not saying I know how to make gold or that I've done it. I haven't. But this certainly, when you look through the history books of alchemy, it certainly seems like gold is something that can be made. But they definitely don't want us knowing that anymore.
Are you familiar with the work of Louis Chevron, Kervran? He wrote a book called Biological Transmutation.
No. Louis
That's something
Chevron.
you would, yeah. He well, not so much to go into his work, but just this idea that biological transmutation is a thing also. And to me, this just kind of in and of itself destroys the periodic table as we're taught it, because this whole narrative of exploding suns is ridiculous. Because like the simplest explanation, which I come back to over and over again, is the chicken egg, and the very simple idea that the amount of calcium that is in the chicken's egg, which a chicken can produce an egg every day, is greater than the amount of calcium in the chicken's diet. So you have, what is it, mica and these different things that the chicken is consuming, and then it is biologically merging those elements to create calcium. So right there in the biological process of a chicken, you have a refutation, as I understand it, of the periodic table that we've been given. And there's another experiment that was done where they put a tree or a bush in a pot. They put it into a room, and it was exposed for years to only distilled water, so there was no mineral element in the water, and sunlight. And they weighed the tree and its soil and the pot before the beginning of the experiment. And then after a number of years, this tree grew and grew and took on mass and had greater weight. So if all it's getting is sunlight and distilled water, where are the elements coming from for it to increase its mass? It has to be creating them itself. And so this ties into a lot of my work on the subject of the great trees and petrification, instant petrification, and the different ways in which the elements are created. So this is definitely an in-depth topic that I would love to pick your brain on in a future conversation. But that's where I'd like to go with that eventually.
Yeah. I remember someone, it might have been Tom Cowan, maybe talking about transmutation of sodium into potassium. Is it? There's something in biology where it's like, is it sodium inside the cells, potassium outside the cells? And they're meant to be this little pump in the cell that like pumps them through and stuff. But actually, the transmutation angle explains it all much more nicely, I believe. But it's cell biology.
And if you think of the Russell periodic table with the sine wave and these different octaves of elements, then it's there's a shift from one octave to another, which we would describe as an elemental shift, that it's becoming something different than what it was. And I think it's such a fascinating subject. I wish I had studied a lot of chemistry and physics when I was younger so that I could actually go in depth into those subjects. Instead, for me, it's just more ideas, and I have to talk to somebody like you to try and sort it out.
It's been a great chat, though, Mike.
It has. Maybe if there are any questions in the comments before we go, somebody would like to.
I'll just say about your I'll just say about your heart rocks. We talked to you about the heart rocks. Man, there's so many of them around here. We find them all the time. Beautiful, like white rocks with all the heart shaped, like with all the holes in the right place for like the aorta and stuff. So I think your work's absolutely amazing and really important, and it's really expanded my mind as well. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's whether or not they're hearts, I haven't proven it from a mainstream scientific perspective yet. At some point, I would love to have the funding to spend the many thousands of dollars that would be required to do a spectrographical analysis of the elements, because I think if you were to have two columns and compare the constitutional elements of a fleshy heart to these stones, you would probably be able to see, there are correlations, and then this particular thing is shifted to that, and that would be interesting to look at from a looking at the Russell periodic table, like, is that an octave up or down from what it was, and then you might be able to begin to get some sort of undeniable proof. But there's no doubt whatsoever that there's a reoccurring pattern that goes beyond random chance or erosion or just fragments of larger sedimentary layers breaking off and then eventually eroding into these shapes, because there's far too much anatomical specificity. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting subject. If people who are listening are not familiar with that work, I have a whole playlist on petrified organs on my channel that's touching on that, and literally hundreds and hundreds of examples, and many that have been sent to me from around the world from other people that are in many cases even more majestic than the ones I'm showing, because they still have the fleshy color of the of the hearts. So yeah, thanks for the compliment. I appreciate it. And obviously I want to have further conversations with you to tie in those themes, to talk about things like radium and helium and plasma physics and stuff that maybe is not your area of expertise, but you've probably dipped into a lot of these subjects out of your own curiosity. And I think that could be a really fruitful conversation or conversations. So maybe this is a good place to I don't see any specific questions in the chat. Thank you all for coming. There's still 168 people watching, which is great to have.
Oh, that's awesome.
Have a lot of people getting exposed to your work. I really encourage people to buy this book, buy it and give it to other people, people who are skeptics, people who think you're crazy, because he's laid things out in such a really beautiful, simple way that's easy to understand, and will hopefully open the skeptics' minds to ideas that they might not normally have considered. And I got so much out of it already, having dived deeply into these subjects for years now. So thank you for writing it. And again, I wish I could travel back in time and read it when I was younger, because it would have saved me a ton and turned me on to all kinds of new ideas that I never dreamed of when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s. So congratulations, and I hope it continues to be found and by others and sell, and that you make a bunch of money from it, because you deserve it.
Oh, thank you very much, Mike. That's wonderful. It's been a great chat, and yeah, really excited to talk with you some more. We got so much more we can cover.
Yeah, and it'd be fun to get you on a panel. I know Topher would love to pick your brain. I don't know. Have you been on with Topher Gardner before?
You know, actually, he hit me up a few months ago, said he'd like to have me on, but we haven't followed up and set a date. So hopefully he still wants to have me on. I'd love to chat with him as well. Yeah.
And my friend Lenny Time, he's the one I mentioned he's got a PhD in molecular chemistry. It'd be fun to just get some guys on and start to riff on some of these different subjects and try and work out some theoretical models when it comes to the subject of instant petrification, because if it could be reproduced, that would be a death blow to the geological model.
I see. Yeah. So like reproducing the instant petrification in a laboratory setting, that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I haven't even begun to go anywhere near that. I'm a vegetarian, lifelong vegetarian. The idea of going and buying hearts at the butcher and starting to toy with them, I just can't deal with it. But a friend of mine, Howard, he doesn't have the same hangups, and he went out and bought this big, beautiful cow's heart that he sent me a picture of. I'm like, oh my God. So he's interested in trying the boiling process and doing the blunt dissection to show the heliocentric, the myocardial ventricular band, which is this whole idea that the heart is a rope. And I have a video on my channel, a 1-minute video that people can watch if they don't know what I'm talking about, called "The Heart is Not What You Think." And it's it's a really beautiful little short video that I made, showcasing the discoveries and the amazing work of this man, Francisco Torrent-Guasp, who coincidentally lived and worked his whole career working out of his home on the foothills of Mont Go, this mountain that I've done a whole lot of investigation into. So that there's just a synchronicity there where I found all these heart stones, came across his work, which opened my eyes to different anatomical features that I hadn't considered. That then I went back to the stones that I'd already found and found that those features were there, very, very specific features in many of the stones that I'd already gathered. So I had just seen these lines and thought of them as random creases in the stone, but I didn't realize that they lined up perfectly with the anatomy of the heart. And it was his work that helped me make that correlation. And then it turns out that he lived and worked his whole career, like literally a 15-minute drive from me. So what are the odds? It's a crazy sync. So
that's great. I really think you're onto something with all this, man. It's really good science. Everything you've done that I've seen, I think it's really solid and makes perfect sense to me from everything I know. So full power to you, man.
And this is coming from a PhD theoretical physicist. So hey, I've arrived. No, thank you.
Well, me, I'm just a fool. Don't listen to me.
Oh, that's right. Me too. Definitely a fool. Definitely a fool. Don't. By the way, this is all just theoretical musings. Don't take anything we say as fact.
Yeah, we're just playing.
Yeah, this is all just been. Yeah, that's our. What do you say? The disclaimer for the tubes of you.
Yep.
So, all right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. I knew it would be, and we'll pick up the talking stick again soon and continue.
Amazing. All right.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you for joining in. It's been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.